Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And, today we're going really in depth with Tim Cook, the guy who had to step into some really big shoes after Steve Jobs left us.
Yeah.
Um, we're going to be using a ton of sources for this one. We've got Leander Connie's biography of Cook,
Okay.
a bunch of news articles, a bunch of interviews with him, just to get you thinking about Cook as a leader, right? And was he really just an operations guy, or was there something more there?
That's a really good question because you look at his early life and you can really see how those experiences sort of shaped his entire approach to leadership later on.
Yeah.
Just imagine growing up in rural Alabama and as a kid witnessing a KKK cross burning.
Yeah. I mean, that's not something you just forget, that shapes you as a person.
It does.
Absolutely.
And then, on top of that, he wins this essay contest about racial equality.
Right.
And he's told that he can't accept the award in person because of segregation. So these weren't abstract concepts for Cook. These were formative experiences.
This was his life.
Yeah.
And it makes you think, how much did that play a role in his later activism as Apple's CEO?
Right.
Right. We see it in his stance on LGBTQ plus rights on the environment, even speaking out against discrimination back in Alabama.
Yeah. And, it's these kind of things that really make you stop and think about it. Those values that were forged early on, those was things that he carried with him throughout his entire life.
Absolutely.
And it's not just these big public stances.
Yeah.
This is a guy who calls his mom every single Sunday, no matter where he is in the world.
Wow.
That type of loyalty that speaks volumes about a person.
Yeah, it does. And it's a good reminder that these CEOs, these figures that we read about, they're people too, with backgrounds and histories, and all of that informs the decisions that they make.
Right.
So when we look at Cook's career, even before Apple, we can see some of these values coming
Oh,
out.
absolutely.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit, because when I first heard, Tim Cook, oh yeah, the supply chain guy, I was like, okay, spreadsheets.
Yeah.
How exciting can this be?
Right.
But then you dig a little deeper and it's like, oh, wow.
He's a master strategist.
Yeah, this guy was a master strategist.
He wasn't just sitting there crunching numbers. He was at IBM. He was at Compaq when these ideas of lean manufacturing and just-in-time inventory were like revolutionary.
Yeah.
So think about this. Instead of these giant warehouses full of parts, imagine the parts arriving just when they're needed.
Wow.
No waste, maximum efficiency. That's what Cook really brought to the table.
Yeah, and that's actually what saved Apple from near bankruptcy back in the late 90s.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, they were on the ropes.
Yeah.
And then Cook comes in with his operational wizardry.
It's amazing. There's this crazy story about him securing all this air freight capacity, right before the holiday season in 98. Right. Like competitors were scrambling, but Cook had already anticipated the demand and he had locked down all the resources.
He was ahead of the game.
It was amazing. It's like logistics as a competitive weapon.
It's fascinating. And this is where it gets interesting for me, because you have all these critics saying, okay, sure, he's great with operations, but he's no Steve Jobs.
Right.
He doesn't have that visionary leadership.
Yeah.
But then you look at what Cook actually does at Apple, and it's like, wait a minute.
Yeah, you see this really interesting divergence from Jobs' approach.
Yeah.
In a lot of really key areas.
Yeah.
Remember the Apple Maps debacle?
Oh, yeah.
Early versions were a mess.
Total PR nightmare.
Total PR nightmare. And, Jobs would have probably said, you're holding it wrong.
Oh, absolutely.
But Cook, he did something completely different.
Yeah, what did he do?
He issued a public apology.
Wow.
Which was huge at the time, admitting fault and promising to fix it.
Yeah.
And I think that really signaled this shift in Apple's culture, where it's like, okay, we're prioritizing user experience over ego. We're willing to own our mistakes.
It's a more humble approach, for sure.
It is.
But it was still very strategic.
Oh, yeah.
By taking responsibility, he actually kind of solidified Apple's reputation as a company that cares about its customers.
It's amazing how that works, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just with Maps either. You think about his push for corporate social responsibility.
Right.
Like all of that environmental sustainability was like a core part of Apple's identity.
Right.
Investing in renewable energy, pushing their suppliers to improve working conditions.
Yeah.
It was a total 180 from the kind of lip service approach that they had under
I
Jobs.
think that's where those early life experiences really come into play.
Yeah.
Cook's personal values are totally intertwined with Apple's actions as a company.
Right.
You can't really separate the two.
So it's not just about being a CEO. It's about using that platform to make a change.
Exactly.
Which leads us to maybe one of the defining moments of Cook's leadership, the FBI-Apple encryption battle back in 2016.
Oh, yeah, this was high stakes.
Yeah.
The FBI wanted Apple to create a backdoor to access the iPhone of one of the terrorists involved in the San Bernardino shooting.
Right.
And Cook just flat out refused.
He did.
He said it would compromise the privacy of every iPhone user and set a really dangerous precedent.
And that was a bold move.
It was.
Especially with all the public pressure.
Oh, yeah, the scrutiny was intense.
I mean, he was basically betting that people valued their privacy more than, national security concerns.
And he didn't just, issue a press release and call it a day.
No.
He was out there engaging with the media, writing open letters.
Wow.
Explaining encryption in a way that everybody could understand.
Yeah.
It was incredible.
It was a masterclass
in
leadership and communication during a crisis, and it paid off.
It did.
He solidified Apple's reputation as a champion for privacy, and it really set them apart from those other tech giants that were much less willing to take a stand.
Yeah.
But, it wasn't all smooth sailing.
Even with his commitment to diversity and inclusion, Apple faced a lot of criticism for how slow that progress has been, especially at the leadership level.
That's right.
And Cook has been very vocal about his commitment, drawing on his own experience as a gay man in a predominantly straight white male industry.
Yeah.
But the critics were saying, look, Apple's not doing enough, especially with all the resources that they have.
Right.
So how do we reconcile that?
Mm-hmm.
Because on one hand, we see his personal commitment. We see him pushing for things like everyone can code and investing in STEM education for underrepresented groups. But the results haven't always matched the rhetoric.
Well, it is a complex issue, and it really speaks to the challenges of making real meaningful change in a company that's as big as Apple.
Yeah.
Even with the best intentions, there are systemic barriers and biases that can be really hard to overcome.
And it brings up all these questions like, how much can one CEO really impact a company's culture?
Right.
Or is it even possible for a company as big as Apple to truly live up to these ideals of diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, I mean, that's a conversation that really goes beyond just Apple.
Yeah.
It's about the entire tech industry.
It's about society as a whole.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder,
Yeah.
how much does a CEO's personal stance on these issues actually influence a company's direction?
Especially a company as huge as Apple.
Exactly. Especially companies huge as Apple,
Right. And it's not just talk either.
Yeah.
We see him putting his money where his mouth is, so to speak, like those accessibility features that are baked into Apple products.
Yeah.
That's not just good PR. It's about making tech that is usable for everybody.
Exactly. It goes beyond just, those hiring practices.
Right.
It's about that broader commitment to inclusivity.
Right.
And you see that same mindset in his approach to, sustainability.
Yeah, and it's interesting because some investors have actually criticized Cook for focusing so much on these social issues.
Really?
They're saying that, it distracts from the bottom line from Apple's core business.
Well, there's always that tension, right? Between idealism and pragmatism.
Yeah.
How do you do good in the world and still run a $1 trillion company?
Right. And to be fair, Apple hasn't always gotten it right.
For sure.
We've seen those controversies about the working conditions in those Chinese factories,
Yeah.
the environmental impact of mining those rare earth minerals.
Yeah, that's a valid point. I mean, no company is perfect.
Right.
And Apple's global supply chain definitely has its share of ethical challenges.
But what I find interesting is that Cook hasn't really shied away from those criticisms.
No.
He's engaged in dialogue. He's pushed for greater transparency. He's made changes where necessary.
Yeah.
It's a work in progress, but at least it seems like he's trying to move things in the right direction.
Absolutely. And he's not afraid to take risks either.
Yeah.
Even if it ruffles some feathers.
Right.
Remember Apple Park, that spaceship-like headquarters?
Oh, yeah, that's straight out of a sci-fi movie.
I know that giant ring powered by renewable energy surrounded by trees.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive.
It is impressive, but it also drew a lot of criticism.
It did.
For being isolated and exclusive.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
People thought it was kind of a symbol of Apple being detached from the real world.
Yeah, but you're always going to get some pushback when you're trying to do something different, something groundbreaking.
That's true.
And Cook seems comfortable with that.
He does.
He's not afraid to make bold decisions, even if it upsets some people.
Yeah, and let's not forget, he's done all of this while leading Apple through this period of massive growth and change.
Yeah.
I mean, the iPhone became this global phenomenon. The Apple Watch created this whole new category of wearable tech.
Right.
And their services business is just booming.
It really is. It's remarkable how they've maintained that momentum.
It is.
Maybe there hasn't been a truly groundbreaking product since the iPad.
Yeah.
But they've consistently iterated and improved. And they've expanded into these new areas like healthcare and augmented reality.
And they became the first trillion-dollar company in history.
Yeah, that's insane.
It's a real testament to Cook's ability to execute, to manage a complex global business.
Yeah.
And to keep Apple at the forefront of the tech industry.
It makes you wonder what's next for Tim Cook and for Apple.
What kind of legacy will he leave behind?
That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, he's already cemented his place in history as the guy who led Apple into this second golden age.
Yeah.
But it feels like there's more to come.
It does.
He's still relatively young.
He is.
And he's clearly passionate about using Apple's platform to actually make a difference in the world.
There are all those rumors about Project Titan.
Yeah?
Apple's supposed foray into the automotive industry.
Yeah, with the self-driving car.
Imagine the impact they could have.
Oh, my God.
With their focus on design, user experience, and tech integration.
That would be a game changer. It would fit perfectly with Cook's vision for Apple. A company that isn't afraid to push boundaries and tackle these big challenges.
Right, but there are also questions about, whether Apple can maintain that level of growth in a market that's becoming increasingly more competitive.
Right.
The smartphone market is saturated. Rivals like Samsung and Huawei are catching up.
Yeah.
And there's this feeling that Silicon Valley's dominance might be waning.
That's a valid concern.
It is.
But I don't think we should underestimate Tim Cook.
No.
I mean, he's proven time and time again that he's a shrewd businessman, he's a visionary leader, and he's a master strategist.
Remember that air freight move back in '98?
Exactly.
I mean, come on.
It's easy to get caught up in the product launches and the flashy headlines.
It is.
But Cook's genius is really in those long-term strategies.
Absolutely.
That behind-the-scenes maneuvering.
Yeah, and maybe that's what really sets him apart from someone like Jobs.
Interesting.
It's not just about the one more thing moment. It's about building a sustainable future for Apple.
And that future is intertwined with his commitment to those social issues.
Right.
Sustainability, privacy, inclusivity. These aren't just side projects for Cook.
No.
These are core to his vision for Apple.
Absolutely.
Which brings us to a really interesting question.
Okay.
Is it possible for a company like Apple to be both wildly successful and deeply ethical?
That's a good question.
Can they balance those profit motives with a real, genuine commitment to making the world a better place?
Because let's face it, there are a lot of companies out there that talk a big game about values, but their actions don't match up.
We've seen it all. Greenwashing diversity theater.
Oh, yeah.
So is Apple different? Are they actually walking the walk, or is it all just clever marketing?
It's a tough question, and I don't think there's an easy answer.
Yeah.
We've seen both sides of the coin with Apple.
Right.
They've made real strides in sustainability and accessibility. They've taken a stand on privacy, but they've also been criticized for their labor practices and their environmental impact.
So it's this constant balancing act.
It is.
Between the pressure to grow the demands of their shareholders and their own stated values.
And maybe that's the defining tension of Tim Cook's leadership.
Interesting.
Can he navigate those competing forces?
Yeah.
And create a company that is both profitable and a force for good in the world?
It's a high-stakes game.
It is.
And the whole world is watching because the choices that Cook and Apple make, they're going to have ripple effects.
They are.
That extend far beyond Cupertino.
Yeah.
They'll impact all of us, whether we use their products or not.
That's what makes this whole deep dive so fascinating.
It really is.
We're not just talking about gadgets and tech specs. We're talking about the future of technology, the role of corporations in society, and the power of leadership to actually shape our world.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to look beyond those headlines.
Yes.
To really peel back the layers and understand what's going on.
Because whether you love Apple or hate them or somewhere in between, there's no denying that they are a force to be reckoned with.
They are a force.
And Tim Cook is the man at the helm steering that ship into uncharted waters.
So as we move into the final part of our deep dive,
I
think it's worth reflecting on what we've learned about Cook as a leader. We've seen his strengths, his weaknesses, his successes, and his struggles.
Right.
But the big question remains. What will Tim Cook's legacy be? I mean, he's already achieved what most CEOs only dream of, record profits, groundbreaking products, global recognition. But what will people remember him for?
Yeah, it's interesting, because a lot of his approach has seemed like he's playing the long game.
Mm.
Remember when everybody was going crazy for virtual reality?
Yeah.
Apple was kind of quietly working on augmented reality, and now you see their strategy playing out, with ARKit and all this potential for those immersive experiences.
Yeah, it's like they're thinking 5 steps ahead, anticipating where the puck is going to be, not just where it is now.
Right.
And that's where I think Cook's deep understanding of operations and supply chains really comes in.
Oh, yeah.
They're able to make those big bets because they have the infrastructure and the expertise to pull it off.
But the stakes are higher than ever. We're in a time of unprecedented technological change with AI automation. You've got the rise of China as a tech powerhouse.
Right.
Apple can't just sit back and relax.
No, they can't rest on their laurels. And that brings us back to the core of this whole deep dive.
Yeah.
We've gone from Cook's childhood in Alabama to the boardrooms of Cupertino.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about supply chains, privacy battles,
Mm-hmm.
trillion-dollar valuations. I mean, what does it all mean?
Right.
What kind of leader will Tim Cook ultimately be remembered as?
I think we've gotten some really valuable insights from these sources. Cook's values-driven leadership, his long-term vision, that willingness to stand up for what he believes in, those qualities are more important than ever.
They're crucial in a world that's just getting more and more complex.
Absolutely.
I mean, he's really shown us that it's possible to be successful and ethical, to build a profitable company and still make a positive impact.
Yeah, but there's still that question.
What's next?
What's next exactly? Now that they've hit that $1 trillion mark, now that they have this global influence, what responsibility do they have to use that power for good?
Right. Will Cook continue to put those social issues front and center? Or will the pressure to keep growing, to keep fending off the competition, will that force him to shift gears?
Yeah. It's something we'll all be watching closely because those decisions are going to have a ripple effect far beyond Apple.
They're going to affect all of us.
They will.
And that's the final thought we want to leave you with today.
Okay.
As you go about your day, think about this. What kind of future do you want to see for technology? And what role can companies like Apple play in shaping that future?
It's not just about the gadgets and the profits.
Right.
It's about the kind of world we want to live in.
Absolutely.
And the choices leaders like Tim Cook make, they're going to have a real impact on that world.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a fascinating journey. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, keep exploring.